Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I don't know whether this counts as pro-revenge, but here's my story from a few years back. I, Lily, 28F at the time, had just started dating Jack, 30M, and things seemed great. A really nice guy, intelligent and good-looking. After 2 months of dating, he invited me and two of his childhood friends, let's call them Sam and Chris, for an extended 31st birthday celebration weekend at his dad's country house in a small town. His father was going to be there too, and I was excited to meet everyone. Friday was fun. I hit it off well with Jack's dad, a smart and caring man. Saturday. After a lovely day, we had a garden party with neighbors, including some of Jack's friends. After hours of drinking, a group gathered around a fire pit sharing childhood stories. That's when things went south. Of course, it started innocently enough with silly kid tales. But then Jack and his friends began telling really messed up stuff. In particular, they recounted how at 14 or 15 they mercilessly bullied Dennis, a very shy, isolated classmate, for almost 6 months. Cruel jokes, name-calling, the whole 9 yards. As if that wasn't bad enough, they created a fake online dating profile and spent months messaging him, pretending to be a girl, flirting and developing a fake relationship with the poor guy. Some people at school were in on the joke, mocking Dennis behind his back. They used pictures of Chris's actual cousin, and Dennis genuinely thought he had an online girlfriend to whom he poured out his heart. Eventually, they got bored and set up a bogus in-person meetup, telling Dennis to take a long bus ride wearing a silly shirt as a prank. Of course, no one showed, and who knows how long the humiliated kid waited. If Dennis hadn't figured it out already, the next day at school, Jack and Chris shared the jokes with everyone, including Dennis's lovesick messages. The kid stopped coming to class and apparently transferred schools. It must have been extremely traumatizing. Did Jack, Sam, and Chris show any shame? Not a bit of remorse, especially from Jack and Chris. They kept cracking jokes about it, even regretting they weren't evil enough to get Dennis to send nudes or sexy pics. I don't even want to imagine what might have happened if he had. To say I was uncomfortable is an understatement. I was absolutely horrified and started to despise Jack more than anything. I wasn't the only one. Jack's dad, who overheard the end of the story, looked utterly disappointed in his drunken idiot son, though Jack didn't even notice. I bolted from the party after that and went back to the house. I couldn't sleep at all that night, thinking about the evening and how Jack still found it funny. I heard him stumble in around 4 a.m. but pretended to be asleep. Sunday was Jack's actual birthday, and we'd planned a fancy surprise lunch date before meeting the group later. But instead, I got up early, quietly packed my bags, and took a train back to the city alone. I texted Jack happy birthday, saying I'd gone ahead to set up a surprise, and gave him an address about an hour away to meet me. He excitedly agreed to follow my instructions. When he arrived at 12:30 p.m., I told him to wait, that there was a delay. Then I said to drive 30 minutes to a restaurant, that I was on my way and would explain the holdup when I got there. I also told him to order food and the priciest bottle of wine. Around 1:30 p.m., after he'd been waiting over an hour, I finally texted, "So, how does it feel to have someone play with your feelings?" Then I stopped responding to his increasingly frantic calls and texts. Eventually, Sam called from an unknown number, saying I'd ruined Jack's birthday. I simply said, "This is a tiny payback for what you did to Dennis. Tell Jack to stop calling me," and hung up, blocking them both. I felt bad that night, as I had grown fond of Jack. In the following days, a mutual friend called to say my reaction was completely absurd and unfair, that it wasn't my place to punish someone for teenage actions, and that there were more adult ways to handle it. Only a few people supported what I did. Most thought I was an idiot. Jack tried for months to make amends and win me back. I never responded to a single message. I don't regret it. I just hope Dennis, who must be around 37 now, is doing well. The next one is an entitled People Story. I've lived in my house for over 15 years and never had any issues with my neighbors. Everyone pretty much kept to themselves while still being friendly if we happened to cross paths. So when Karen and her husband moved in next door about 6 months ago, I didn't think much of it at first. I went over to introduce myself and welcome them to the neighborhood like I do with all new residents. But right off the bat, something seemed off about Karen. She had this uppity, entitled attitude that rubbed me the wrong way. Still, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. The problem started pretty soon after they moved in. I began catching Karen snooping around on my property when she thought I wasn't home. If I was out mowing the lawn, she'd be peeking in my back windows. If I left for work, she'd be letting her dog run all over my yard. It was like she had no sense of boundaries or respect for privacy. I confronted her nicely at first. I explained that while I tried to be a good neighbor, I valued my space and didn't appreciate her trespassing or looking in my windows. Her response? She flat out denied ever setting foot on my property despite me catching her red-handed multiple times. She'd always come up with some excuse like, I was just looking for my dog, or I thought I saw an injured animal that needed help. Yeah, right. When the polite request didn't work, I had to be more blunt. I told her under no circumstances was she to enter my yard without permission or even look in my windows. This did not go over well with Karen. She went on a tirade about how I was being unneighborly and she had a right to make sure everything was okay around the neighborhood. According to her, privacy was secondary to the greater good of the community. Despite my warnings, she kept right on trespassing and snooping around my house when I wasn't home. The final straw came when I caught her letting her dog do his business all over my lawn. When I yelled at her to get off my property, she made a huge scene and threatened to call the police on me for harassment. At that point, I'd had it. Since she clearly had no regard for direct communication, I had to take more drastic measures. I installed security cameras that covered every inch of my property. I also put up a locked gate and no trespassing signs around the perimeter. The very next day, my new camera alerted me to activity in the yard. Sure enough, there was Karen peeking in my windows again. So I immediately called the police and showed them the footage of her lurking around my property. When the cops showed up and confronted her, she played dumb and insisted she was just inspecting my house because she was concerned about me. She flat out lied to the police and said she had never been warned to stay off my property. Boy, was she surprised when I pulled up the recordings of our previous conversations. Once the cops saw evidence of the multiple warnings I'd given Karen about trespassing, they slapped the cuffs on her right then and there. As she was dragged away screaming, the look of shock on her face was priceless. I guess it had never occurred to her that actions have consequences even for middle-aged white women. Karen only spent the night in jail, but being arrested seemed to finally knock some sense into her. She avoided me like the plague after that, no more snooping around my yard or peeking in my windows. She suddenly seemed to understand the meaning of privacy and personal property. My polite requests and blunt warnings hadn't deterred her entitled behavior. She thought she could harass me on my own property without repercussions, but the second I had video proof and got law enforcement involved, she realized she wasn't above the law. Sometimes the only way to deal with a Karen is to forcefully remind them their actions are unacceptable. Calling the cops on her for trespassing was a last resort, but it actually improved our neighborhood. She not only stays off my yard now, but leaves all our other neighbors alone too. I hope this incident caused her to reevaluate her self-righteous attitude. The world doesn't revolve around her desires and whims. We all have rights, including the right to feel safe in our own homes. If it takes legal intervention to teach her basic boundaries and respect, so be it. At the end of the day, she brought those handcuffs on herself with her utter disregard for me and my property. Don't want to get arrested? Don't be a lying, harassing Karen. Case closed. The next one is a petty revenge story. New restaurant just opened, maybe a few weeks in, and of course the place is slammed because everyone wanted to check it out, and being in a not-so-great area, the food was exceptionally good. I go to check on one of my tables, and this lady screams at me that she ordered her food an hour ago. I don't do confrontations, and thankfully my boss was right there, so I let him handle it. I went to check the ticket, and it had been 45 minutes along with every other ticket that was waiting. Yes, it has been a while, but the place was new and super busy. What do you expect? It was so awful that tables that weren't even mine were stopping me to ask if I was okay. A year or so later, I saw her in a different restaurant I was working at, and thankfully she wasn't in my section, but I warned my coworker. Thankfully, she just so happened to show up again, and it was my last day. I could hardly contain my excitement. As I left, I stopped at her table and said, "You probably don't remember me, but I waited on you about a year ago at X. You screamed at me in front of the entire restaurant, and I just thought you should know you're a terrible person." The text I got from my coworker after was awesome. The lady started flipping out, demanding to know my name, but all management said was, "She doesn't work here." The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened last year. I, F31, was 1 week away from my due date and was working full-time in a school administration position. At this time, I had the capability to work from home if needed. X too sick to come into work, catch up on extra work, unable to secure daycare for my child, etc. When I accepted the position, prior to my pregnancy, I was told by my boss, let's call her Ronnie, that it was very flexible as long as I got my hours in. I very rarely worked from home and typically only did so for an hour or two in the morning if it was needed later on in order to work before OBGYN appointments, as it was a long commute between work and home/doctor office. However, I was told by Ronnie after accepting the position to try and limit WFH to 2 days a month, which fine, at this point I was well under since I was only working an hour or two maybe twice a month and only once a month before that. Being so close to my due date, I was experiencing physical hardships that made working on site more and more difficult, such as dizzy spells, a pulled tendon in my foot, and severe back pain. I was also scared of potentially going into labor while at work, with it being so far away from the hospital my OBGYN delivers at. To top it all off, my coworkers started asking more invasive questions about my pregnancy that made me uncomfortable. All in all, it was not a fun time. I explained all of this in an email to Ronnie and asked for her permission to almost exclusively work from home up until I go into labor. I said I thought it would be a reasonable accommodation, and I work really well from home. Ronnie responded a couple days later denying my request to work from home at all and said I needed to be there since we would be starting some of our busiest work in a couple months, which I would be gone for on maternity leave anyways, so I'm not sure why she brought it up. But I could talk to HR about leave options if I am truly having trouble working. BTW, it is illegal in my state to require an employee to take leave if there is a reasonable accommodation that can be made instead. Cue malicious compliance. I immediately went to HR and did just that. We talked about options and found out I could start my leave the very next day and still be paid state mandatory leave pay for the extra time. I informed Ronnie that I would be out starting the next day as I needed to take care of myself. She said, I understand you need to do what's best for you, but you need to understand that I need to do what's best for the team. So, yeah, everything I normally managed basically went to crap in my absence, as the other people on the team weren't qualified to do the work and kept taking time off leading up to my due date instead of learning the basics while I was still there to teach them. I left detailed procedure notes and workflow lists, but I later found out Ronnie had to pick up all the extra work and a lot of it never got done since she didn't have time. But it was best for the team, right, boss? The next one is an entitled people's story. This just happened. I'm still sitting at the lobby in awe of the event, and I wanted to write it down while it's still fresh in my mind. I'm waiting for a ride home, so I got to witness a majority. For blood work at this particular medical center, there's a digital kiosk to sign in rather than speaking to a desk. The kiosk is very simple. Put your ID and insurance card in the machine, it'll scan, check you have a blood work request, then confirm it to the room in the back. While I was waiting, an older woman comes up to the front and entirely passes the kiosk and attempts to open the door into the lab. The door, not locked, is opened, and nurses quickly rush up to stop her, leading to an argument in the lobby with around 3 nurses blocking the door. Nurse 1. Ma'am, you need to check in and wait to be called woman. I'm not doing that crap. You can't pay me to touch a damned computer. I don't even have an ID. You can look up my information in the back. Nurse 2. It doesn't work like that here. The kiosk is very simple. You can manually put in your information if you don't have an ID, woman. I'm not doing that. This is unnecessary. The office in, other town over, doesn't have one. It's hard enough to put a card in the grocery store machine. Now you're making me do it here? Nurse 2. We're not that other location. I'm sorry, but we need you to check in. I can help if you need, woman. This is ridiculous. Just look up my information. I'm an old woman. I won't touch a computer. I don't touch a computer anywhere. You can't force me, Nurse 2. Ma'am, we're not forcing you. It's just how our system works. I can do it for you if you have your information. Woman. Fine. Do it then. From there, she proceeds to announce her personal information very loudly. Nurse inputs it. Nurse 2. Do you have an insurance card? Woman. Obviously. I don't have it on me. You can look it up. Nurse 2. Unfortunately, I can't. Our system doesn't work that way. Do you know your insurance ID? Woman. Yeah, it's number. Nurse 2. There. You're checked in. No problems. Woman. Finally. I don't understand why this new generation is making everything so difficult. You can't expect me to use a computer. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone I know or any of these people behind me. For a 1, 10, I'd give it a 0. Nurse 2. I understand, ma'am. You're signed in, though. You can take a seat now. Woman, I can't go back. I just went through all that trouble to sign in. I'm an old woman. This is already stressful. Nurse 1. There's someone in the back already. You'll be called in soon. Woman. I'll make sure to never come to this location again. Hurry it up then. The nurses went into the back and she took a seat somewhat close to me and began talking to the other people in the lobby. Only one other person engaged her, and she started talking about pancakes like she didn't cause a spectacle just now. Is this what secondhand embarrassment is? When she was called, she left her pile of belongings on the chair and went to the back. The next one is an entitled parent story. I have 3 cats. One I've had since middle school. I found her when I got off the bus and took her home. Obviously, my mom paid for everything because I was like 12, 13. The second cat was a stray I brought in off the street in high school. We were living with my grandmother. My mom and grandmother still were paying for everything as I didn't make much money while in high school, but I always took care of the cats as much as they did. The third cat I brought in during college, and I paid for everything for her. As I made more money, I started paying for more things for the others and paid for their vet bills, as my mom never took them to the vet. My first cat ended up obese from being fed too much and ended up with cancer. I recently graduated college and got my big girl job and make significantly more money now, and have been paying for almost everything. Vet bills, even $4,000 eye surgery to remove the first one's cancer, expensive feeder to be able to put her on a diet cat food, food for the other cats, toys, cat trees, water fountains, etc. I always wanted to be able to do this and always planned on doing this since I brought all of them home years ago. I'm wanting to move out from home soon. I live with my mom, and planned on taking my cats with me. At first she wanted to keep 2 of them and let me have one, but has now said I can take all of them, but the second one that I brought in off the street since that one was very close with my grandmother who has since passed away. However, that one is most bonded to me now, and I feel horrible leaving one behind without having the others to play with. Am I in the wrong for wanting to take them all with me? If my mom can't pay for anything except their food litter, how is she going to care for them? She does care for them by refilling the second and thirds feeder and cleaning the litter box. I would have no problem doing all of this on my own though, I just don't get to because she does it already. She stays home all day, doesn't have a job. I told her that she can see them anytime she wants, but she keeps saying, "You're not taking them." I'm scared she's going to hide one of them so that I won't be able to. I plan on getting them all microchipped in 2 weeks, and my name is on all the vet bills. Does this make them legally mine? IDK what to do here. Sorry for the rant. I just know they'd be so much happier with me in a bigger place. My mom and I don't have the greatest relationship. She's been in jail for theft and was addicted to Xanax opioids and would always be nodding out. She's been clean for a year, from what I know, but she doesn't have a job and relies on disability checks from getting out of jail, not for having a physical mental disability, to pay the rent and food stamps for food. IDK where she gets a lot of her money to buy other things. I recently started paying the water bill. Any advice? I was just going to take them one day, but it's hard when she is always at home. I just hate that this is happening. Update, thank you everyone for your advice. I wrote this all out right after another argument with my mom. I came back home after a few hours of running errands, and she said I could take all of them. I was really surprised by this and started crying, and we mended the whole situation. Also, I don't plan on just leaving my mom high and dry and never seeing her again. I'm not going to be very far from her. She also has a partner that stays with her a lot, and a dog. I hope everything stays this way and that nothing changes. She is planning on moving into a different place as well, out of the house we're in RN that we lived in with my grandmother. Whoever keeps the cats will have to move home regardless, so change is inevitable there. If anything changes, I will probably look into the kennel boarding idea. Thank you all again. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.